So please, can you welcome to stage Amber in conversation with the Vandal Factory.
Hello.
Ooh, I'm all right, folks. We're okay.
There's your clipboard.
Hello. Hi, Greenbelt. How you doing?
My clipboard's in my bag.
Oh, Henry. While he's getting his other clipboard out, I'll introduce us. My name's Natalie Quaitmas.
I'm Henry Raby.
Yeah, generally that gets a round of applause. Only from me. And together we are Vandal Factory. We have a podcast that's about arts and activism, and we speak to lots of different people, from musicians to theatre makers to craftivists and people with all kinds of different social justice passions in their hearts. We talk about those creative moments where arts and activism come together. And one of our favourite ever guests on our podcast that I can see you all madly subscribing to right now, it's Vandal Factory. Look it up wherever you save and subscribe. Thank you. You are allowed to get your phones out for this moment. But anyway, one of our favourite ever guests was the incredible Amber! So we were incredibly flattered and another word for flattered?
Delighted.
Gushingly wonderful when you requested that these chumps come and talk to you about your amazing book, Acts of Resistance. So it's a pleasure to be here, and I'm going to stop talking now.
Shall we read Amber's bio? Just to set the scene.
I'm going to move this a bit closer.
Amber Massie-Blomfield is a theatre producer, arts consultant and writer. She was formerly and currently is formerly executive director of Complicité in Camden People's Theatre, has worked for clients including acting touring company Tiata, Fahodzi, Barbican, Pro Helvetica, English Pen, Free World Centre and China Plate. Ooh!
That's such an impressive CV. You're going to have to give it a bit more than that.
If you don't subscribe to The Stage magazine, you'll have absolutely no idea who any of those companies are. But they're all pretty big fish.
In her first book, 20 Theatres to See Before You Die, was shortlisted for the Theatre Book Prize and a recipient of the Society of Authors Michael Mayer Award. Henry has also bought a copy of this book for his mum.
My mum really liked it. She really enjoyed that book. And she also enjoyed Acts of Resistance, which is published in 2024. It received the Gladstone Library's Political Writer in Residence Award and an Arts Council England project grant. Amber is a fellow of the Royal Society of the Arts, is an activist. She's been involved with Rebels, Writers Rebel and Extinction Rebellion. And I think we should start where the story starts, which is you as a young girl watching Blue Peter.
Yeah.
Right? So this is where the book starts, the introduction.
Would you like me to read a little bit?
Yeah, let's have a
Okay,
little
go
bit.
for it. I'll set the scene. Okay, hello everyone. Thank you so much for that introduction. My long CV, I've done a lot of very eclectic things and never quite sure how to describe what my job is. So it's always interesting to hear it read back. But this is the very beginning of my book, and hopefully gives you a bit of a flavour. Imagine for a moment that art can change the world. Not only that it can, but that it has over and over again, and that it will do still, in a manner that can be as explosive as a battle or as creeping as a whisper. Acknowledging this fact would be the beginning of something. It would help us to recognise the power that each of us has in our own hands. Creativity isn't the preserve of those trained in academies or whose work is hung in marble halls. If you've ever sketched a picture, baked a cake, sung karaoke, made a protest placard, written a limerick, planted a flower, boogied to your favourite tune, you possess it. I have carried this belief with me for a long time. As a child, I remember watching a news report about the levels of pollution in the ocean. Incensed and certain I had to do something, I fetched my crayons and crafted a poster featuring a whale vomiting various bits of rubbish I'd gleaned from the recycling. I sent it off to the iconic children's TV show, Blue Peter. I had to explain what Blue Peter was because this was also published in the US, and I was like, people might not know.
Wow. Did you hear that? People don't know what Blue Peter is.
Does anyone under 30 know what Blue Peter was?
It's still going, isn't it?
Still going.
God, I'm so culturally irrelevant.
They haven't invited me on to talk about my book, I note, but there we are. We won't hold it against them. Where, thrillingly, it was shown on national television. Oh, okay, I can hear them over there. Nothing was changed then, at least nothing I could put my finger on. But looking at the screen and understanding that, if only for a moment, my slipshod artwork, which even now looked messier than I'd intended and had possibly lost an important bit of crisp packet in transit, was being beamed into millions of homes around the country, gave me a sense of possibility. The next day, a friend at school came up to me. She'd seen my poster and wanted to know what she could do to help. I spent my teens ferociously trying to express my sense of righteousness through my creativity, staging plays to raise money for former child soldiers in Uganda, and crafting feminist sculptures from dismembered Barbie dolls. I was very serious about art, in a way that was unfashionable then and perhaps is still unfashionable now. Later, when I went to drama school, the tendency among some of my peers was to see the industry we were preparing ourselves for as a money-making business like any other, no different to advertising or hotel management. But I was certain that art's purpose was more significant, though I was still figuring out the reasons why. Once, an artist called Jo Wilding came in to speak to us. She was a human rights lawyer, and she was also a clown. She first visited Iraq as a foreign observer during the war in 2003. But when she returned, she brought the circus with her, a juggler, a stilt walker, and a roadie. They'd spent months touring squatter camps and orphanages, blowing bubbles and performing magic tricks for children who were at risk of forgetting how to smile. During the siege of Fallujah, they got trapped at an under-resourced medical centre and ended up going out in the battered-up ambulance, fetching the injured and using their foreign privilege to get medical supplies past the US troops. In between, she made handkerchiefs disappear and crafted balloon animals for the injured children. A clown in the middle of a war zone is a Daily Mail headline waiting to happen. We had all seen Fallujah on our TV screens, the rubble where the buildings used to stand. How could her actions have made a difference? And yet that day, no one in the class was talking about box office takings or sponsorship deals. The image of those soap bubbles in the air of the ruined streets stayed with me. Amid all the mess my government had made in that place, they struck me as something gracious and good. I was kind of wondering if that would be the right soundtrack for the reading, which you can't. I wasn't quite, not quite what I would have.
There's a bit of a groove to it that I enjoyed. Thank you so much. That is a story that I can really relate to. I was 10 years old when my primary school explained to us they were going to do a mock election, and all the usual parties were represented, you could stand as an independent, and there was one boy the year below me who was going to be the turn the school into a theme park party. So what chance did anyone else have? But my best friend was called Vicky Green, so everyone said, well, you should be the Green Party because you're called Vicky Green. But she got too shy to do the speech in front of the whole school, so I ended up doing it. Ladies and gentlemen, the Green Party in the mock election in 1998 got more votes than all the other parties put together. Thank you very much. And it was so similar. We were making our own posters on recycled bits of paper and putting them up in the class and giving out little saplings for people to plant. And that didn't come from my mum and dad. They didn't teach me that. They were maybe demonstrating their values, but they weren't moralizing at me. So I was curious about, I've certainly had the question put to me a few times, I'm sure you have, about why do you care? Where did that come from? And I just sort of look at people and go, why don't you?
It's a really interesting question that you ask, because I come from a very traditional and conservative home, and actually my parents' values couldn't be more diametrically opposed to mine on the whole. There's a couple of chinks of hope sometimes, but not really. But I really, really got involved in art at a very young age, particularly youth theatre, actually. I was very involved in the Theatre Royal Bath young people's theatre from an early age. And I often reflect on that, and I wonder if my politics and where I came to, particularly in terms of a kind of valuing of collective experience and the making of something together, which I just think is so held at the core of the value of making theatre. And I expect the people making this festival feel the same too. And I just have I'm not sure, but I think that was very definitive. And I think, it's really interesting sometimes to chart, my faith in what art can do and what art can be really is held in my body. It really comes from a place of, yes, it has changed me. I have a story in this book about a moment when I was in my 20s, and my career started out doing publicity for kind of weird experimental fringe theatre. And I was doing publicity for an amazing show called Trilogy by an artist called Nick Green. And this was staged in 2010, and it was an amazing piece all about the history of feminism. And at a crucial moment in the show, everywhere she went, she got a local community of women to come and learn a dance routine to the Pixie song Into the White, which is like a banging tune if you know it. And she'd get all these women to come together and learn this dance routine. And then on the night of the performance, you would do it completely naked in front of the audience. It was so powerful. Anyway, I kept calling up journalists being like, it's so fantastic, this moment's so powerful. And a few of them who knew me quite well were like, well, if it's so powerful, why aren't you doing it? You've got to put your money where your mouth is. So this show ended up going and being on the main stage at the Barbican, which is in front of, thousands of people. And I was like, right, I've got to go and do it. And it was I think about that experience all the time. Wow. It was so incredible.
Every time you get in a bath.
Yeah, exactly. I'm back there. Where's my audience? I think to myself. No, but this, we had just this wonderful week of coming together with this group of women who were going to do this kind of completely wild thing together, and we were going to be naked together. And the way they handled it was just so brilliant, because it was about the journey they took us on in building up our relationship with each other and our confidence with each other. And it changed my life. It changed my relationship with my body. I dumped my boyfriend afterwards, which I don't think is any coincidence. But there are moments like that where I can say, yes, I was changed by that experience. And that sort of gives me the faith that underpins this book, really.
Yeah, wonderful.
So the book, then, Acts of Resistance, for those of you who have... Has anyone read it? Has anyone read it here?
Give us a cheer if you read the book, Rob. Yay!
One polite person, the hands up. Well, they're all going to bite after this. So it's 10 chapters, 10 stories of moments from history of art challenging the narrative, challenging the systems, standing up and trying to make a change. And some of them are incredibly horrific, harrowing moments. That some of them are during war, in concentration camps. Some of them full of joy and hope. They're carnivals. But what was that process like of looking at this history and starting to narrow it down, and ones that were the ones that you knew about, that you were like, that has to go in, and some you discovered? What was that process like of shaping the book?
Yeah, well, this really began, I kind of got very fascinated with this. So my first book was all about interesting theatres all over the UK, but when I was researching this, I got really fascinated by this story of Susan Sontag going to Sarajevo during the siege of Sarajevo in 1993 and directing a production of Waiting for Godot in the middle of the siege in this kind of bombed out theatre in the heart of the city, where she was working with the amazing kind of theatrical community of the city. And I mean, these actors and sound designers and the whole creative team were coming to rehearsals every day to rehearse. I don't know if you're familiar with Waiting for Godot. I'm sure many of you are. It's it's quite an obtuse, difficult play, right? It's not a sort of like feel-good, musical to lift the spirits in the middle of a siege. Nor is it an overtly political play, in a very literal sense. He would have been horrified by any idea that there was a political message behind the play. So I was kind of fascinated by all these actors who were quite literally starving. They didn't have enough to eat. They would have to lie down between scenes that they were rehearsing to kind of gather their energy. They were all rehearsing by candlelight, and they were having to kind of negotiate sniper fire to get to rehearsals every day. And still it mattered so much that they came. It was so important to them. And, I think sometimes in situations of privilege like I've enjoyed in my life, we kind of sort of slightly dismissive of the idea that arts has a political power. It kind of feels like a luxury and slightly self-indulgent to make the claim for the political power of art. And really, I think those, I had the chance to go to Sarajevo and talk to a lot of the company that were involved, and it was a given for them that art was. One of the company members described it as the last defense of civilization, and there was this idea that the siege was designed to destroy the human spirit. And of course, you can see the parallels in what's happening with the genocide in Gaza now, and I feel endlessly moved by the resilience of the Palestinian people. And I know you're interviewing some Palestinian poets tomorrow, aren't you? You'll have them for your podcast. And, what's so extraordinary to me is like the Gaza Free Circus, the people who are going out and clowning and performing to children, or those who are writing poetry about their experience and sending it out into the world to document it. And the power of that as an assertion of humanity in the face of the force of Israel that seeks to destroy it is so moving. I have gone way off your question.
I'll jump in with another one. It's forgive me, I can't remember the name of the documentary, but there's a film about a film festival being created in Gaza under bombardment, under the siege, and the most poignant moment. Not only are they, struggling for electricity, trying to find a screen, trying to find actors. A film festival is a hard thing to do when you have everything that we have. Never mind, you don't have the bare basics. And yet, at one point, I think it's a young man says, well, we need a red carpet. We go, don't be ridiculous. Don't need a red carpet. We're going to have a red carpet. And he risks going out at night to try and find a particular red piece of material to put it down so that when they come through and watch one of the opening film, they will have a red carpet. And it was so poignant, as you say, that act of civilization, that they're not going to take that away from us.
It's dignity.
Dignity, yeah. Incredible amounts of dignity.
It makes me think of my good friend Harris Parsovich, who's become a good friend through the writing of this book, is one of the great European theatre directors, and he was a young man of 30 and produced Waiting for Godot. And he was also the founder of the Sarajevo Film Festival, which is a huge international film festival now. And he founded it during the siege. And one of the journalists, because of course there were loads of journalists hanging around Sarajevo because the siege was happening, so there was a huge amount of press coverage for all of this. And one of the journalists asked him, why are you staging a film festival in the middle of a siege? And he replied, why are they having a siege in the middle of my film festival? And I just think that's such a brilliant, I often think of that line, that's speaking to dignity and,
Absolutely. And how the way the world should be, despite everything.
Absolutely.
Phenomenal. Going back to I found each story, each chapter extremely digestible, and you give them these very simple titles of the hill, the village, the concentration camp, and I felt like that was also in keeping with they're very easeable, easable. Oh dear.
They're easily digestible stories. Like you can pick up and read one of these chapters and, I feel like it's educational. I walk away going, I've learned something. Is that
And
it's not academic. Like,
Yeah.
was that an aim when you were going through
and
it?
I think also when you're looking at 10 stories from all time, from all over the world,
right.
I can imagine I'm doing PhD as well. So the idea of going, well, if you're going to know about this person, you need to understand that social context. And if you're going to understand that group of people, what you really need to know is, and it just gets wider and wider and wider and wider.
Yeah.
And then my head explodes, usually. And I go get a cup of tea and come back to it later. So does that happen to you?
Well, it's definitely not an academic book, and I always have to apologise to the academics for that. But I suppose what happened, the journey was that I really followed my own nose and my own fascination. I mean, to be honest, I started off thinking I was going to write a book just about waiting for Godot during Sarajevo, and my agent told me it wouldn't be very easy to sell. It was too niche, so I listened. And really just started to think about a kind of complementary set of stories. And then what happened was the pandemic happened, and, I'd been imagining that I would go and do a lot of quite in-depth research, as I had in Sarajevo, going to the place, meeting the people. I also went to LA and spent a lot of time in Sontag's archive, which was so amazing. It just wasn't possible during the pandemic. And I read a book I think it's called 50 Words for Snow by a writer called Nancy Campbell. And she's a nature writer a kind of nature and travel writer who's quit flying for environmental reasons. And she said that it has been very liberating for her, because actually she feels like she can write about anywhere now, because she encounters places through internet, through researching people online and so on. And I sort of felt, because of the pandemic, I had a permission to write much, much more widely. And so I kind of took in a broader scope of stories. I mean, there's, for example, the story in Bolivia with the Ucamau group, which there's no way I would have gone to Bolivia, but I felt because of the pandemic that I could include that story. And actually it gave that possibility for, I think, the book to be a bit less Eurocentric as well. I think I've got stories from every continent on there. Maybe not Arctic and Antarctic, but maybe everywhere else.
Penguins in revolt.
Yeah, right. And so, I think that kind of opened up that possibility. And really, I was kind of collecting this bank of stories as I went along, because people tell you, don't they, when you're writing a book, people are like, have you heard of this person? Have you heard of that one? Kind of doing a lot of research, spending a lot of time in the British Library, and just collecting this bank of stories. And really sort of, I mean, the first thing was, are they good stories? And I think these are all kind of like cracking yarns one way or another. They are about people doing something bold and kind of overcoming the odds and all those things. And then really they kind of came to represent threads of my thinking, and the kind of central story in each chapter can kind of hold a few different threads. So it kind of came together like that. I mean, structurally, it's quite a wild ride, sure. But people seem to enjoy it, so
I think so. Go on.
Well, I was going to say, I think we need to hear a bit more from the book, so
yes.
Shall we have another extract, please?
Yeah, I was going to read a bit, I thought, about Claude Cahun, who was an extraordinary queer artist. She, with her stepsister, who she was also in a romantic relationship with, was living on Jersey during the Second World War, during the Nazi occupation. And they kind of staged this incredible underground resistance, just the two of them, during the occupation years on Jersey. So I'm going to read you some of that. A single photograph from the occupation years remains in Claude Cahun's archive. Her cat hid in the window, the beach beyond. On the sand are 11 figures in inky silhouette, German soldiers. They cast a long shadow over the war years in St. Brelad's Bay. Early on, they took up residence in the hotel a few moments' walk from the home Cahun and Moore shared. Services were held for them in the church next door. As the months went by, they began to bury their dead there. Sometimes, after a funeral, the Germans found new wooden crosses planted in the freshly dug earth, emblazoned with white text. For them, the war is over, it read. The crosses were splattered with crimson. If the soldiers had looked closely at the unassuming middle-aged spinsters who lived in the house next door, would they have spotted red paint stains beneath their fingernails, or scuffs on their knees from where, at night, they'd clambered over the cemetery wall? But they never had any reason to look closely, nor did they connect them with the banner that had appeared above the altar when they arrived one Sunday for worship, which read, "Jesus is great, but Hitler is greater. Jesus died for us, but we must die for Hitler." Colquhoun and Moore had acquired a new disguise. Dressed in wellies and headscarves, they looked like ordinary Jersey farmers' wives, little different to the other inhabitants of the island. After years of shrugging off the confines of female gender norms, Colquhoun was alert to the irony of the fact that this normative attire was now her redoubt. This was role play of a new sort, rather different to the days when she dressed up for a night out with the surrealists in Paris, her eyes made up extravagantly, head shaved and painted pink or gold. Now the pockets of their macks jangled with coins decorated with the words, "Down with War," as they headed for the local amusement park. They went on the rides and left the coins lying about for off-duty soldiers to find. Their resistance had begun with a small act of subversion. In the early days of the occupation, Colquhoun kept turning a phrase over in her mind. Better an end without terror than a terror without end. She read it in a magazine. It had been popular among German citizens in the 1930s as they had watched the Nazis grab power. She stripped it back until she was left with two words: without end. Bleak as it was, the adage, she thought, contained a truth. She knew that the people who suffered on both sides were not those pushing checkers across maps in war rooms, as if wrapped up in a game of tin soldiers. Instead, it was the working-class families whose teenage sons would never return from the front line, whose homes were bombed and livelihoods destroyed. Nothing for them would ever be the same. She believed in the perpetual distance from definitive victory. I'm going to say that again. She believed in the perpetual distance from definitive victory. A war stains history, reverberates across time, without end. Colquhoun and Moore graffitied their slogan on nearby walls and buildings, scribbled it in purple crayon on empty cigarette packets the soldiers were likely to pick up, looking for tobacco. That was the first act. Over the years that followed, they mounted a quiet, concerted artistic resistance that nearly cost them their lives.
Extraordinary.
Applause for Colquhoun and Moore.
Yeah.
Amazing.
Yeah, amazing, incredible. But before we talk to you about Forever War and the importance of telling historical queer stories, can I please tell you my Guernsey goat story?
Oh, please.
Has anyone heard of the golden Guernsey goats? Right. So in this park where I live, there's these Guernsey golden goats, and they're lovely. And every time I take a friend on this regular goat walk, a dog walk, the goats are there, I say, these are anti-fascist goats. And these are my favourite kind of goats. And they say, why are they anti-fascist goats, Nat? And it's because during the same time period, during the Nazi occupation, everyone was starving. They'd run out of food, including the soldiers. And so they'd eaten through everything, and had to start eating the goats. And there was this particular Guernsey goat that only existed on that island. And one lady called Miriam
Milburn.
Thank you so much. Miriam Milburn got her tiny little herd of goats and hid them inside her house. And sometimes she had to hide them like on the coast in a cave. And so all of the Guernsey goats that now exist are descendants from this one herd. And so that's why they are, it's an act of resistance, not an artistic one, but a goat-related act of resistance.
I love that. That makes me think there's a fantastic film set in the West Bank in Palestine about some
the cows. Yes.
Which a similar story where they were trying to hide them from the occupation. Yeah, amazing.
And Forever War.
Yes, bleak message, isn't it?
Yeah, it is a bleak message.
I'm really struck by. Sometimes we ask ourselves, what would we do under certain circumstances? And the brave, bold, tiny acts of resistance there to put secret messages on coins, to put banners, but the fact that these these two artists had lived such a full, amazing cultural life, but now they look like two little old spinsters, and they were sort of using that disguise to sort of get away with things. That sort of fascinates
I love that
me.
as a woman who's becoming middle-aged. I'm like, oh, you become invisible. How powerful. Like, what can you go up to? And actually, so interesting, isn't it, with all the Palestine Action arrests and so on, how many, pensioners and so on. Incredible.
Where are the pensioners out there? We're looking at you to become nice and radicalised by the end of the interview, if you're not already. I'm seeing some firm nods here. Yes, thank you. Good.
But I think that, this really took, writing this book, and I really did start out kind of looking for, and Kahuna Moore were like heroes on their own terms. But, there is a sense, I guess, where I got to with writing this book. I really started out sort of wanting to look for the stories of, like, there was one individual artwork and it kind of changed everything. And, there are some examples like that in the book. And I even wrote about kind of Mr. Bates versus the post office. And, of course, we've got Adolescence has done something similar. But this, I really kind of moved away from this idea during the writing of the book and as the book evolves of, like, one kind of heroic individual artist makes one fantastic artwork and it changes everything, because I don't think that's how change happens. It's actually, for me, it's much more about sort of creativity and artistic expression woven through resistance, part of a resistance that's coming in all different directions at once. And actually, in my own relationship with my kind of expression of my political resistance has become much, much more localized as a result. It's much more about, I live in Folkestone now, and it's much more about, like, going and hanging the Palestine flag over the motorway crossing, or going and banging the pots and pans in the town centre, or whatever it is. And in a way, I guess before I started on the journey of this book, I didn't quite have, I'd get involved in that stuff, but I didn't feel deeply like this is the thing that's going to change everything. But now I just have so much more belief in change as a form of kind of collective expression rather than individualism. And maybe, like, we're in such a horrible, horrible moment in terms of what's happening in Gaza and so on. Any hope that we might get from it is, I think, that a lot of people are maybe beginning to feel, through the engagement with the protest movements and so on, more of a sense of solidarity with one another, more of a sense of kind of collective endeavour. I think that's really, really powerful, and that's really hopeful.
Yeah.
Well,
I'm going to applaud that. I am certainly going to applaud that.
Well, what we're going to do, we'll have a Q&A in a little bit. So I'm just going to seed that if people want to start rumbling whether there's some questions they'd like to ask Amber. And in the sort of few minutes while people are thinking and rumbling, I think it'd be useful to just maybe talk about some of the climate-related things that you're doing with fern culture, and just to give that a plug, because we've not really talked about the
what I'm doing now.
Right,
yeah. Which is the same. It's the same crisis as everything else, really, isn't it? I mean, I suppose as I was writing this book, I really got drawn more and more to thinking about what some of the kind of artists and activists in the climate space were doing. There's some wonderful examples. I'm very, very passionate about this project called Power, which is happening in Walthamstow, where there's two artists called Dan Edelstein and Hilary Powell, and they're doing a project where they're turning their entire street into a solar power station. But they're kind of really doing it as a kind of creative artistic act, where they're kind of bringing their whole street together to get them to basically fundraise to get solar panels to put on their roofs. But it's all done through kind of festival, through poetry, through music, through visual artistic expression. And they've kind of put this frame around the project of calling it art as a kind of, the way I see it, it's like an invitation to recognise beauty here, and story here, and poetry here,
and the act of bringing people together, and the act of communing around anything, any kind of action, see it as creativity
Yeah.
and see it as a performance.
Yeah.
And the more evil there is in the world, they have such a big megaphone, and so much of our attention is focused on what's evil. We can perform goodness by seeing this as art.
Exactly. And similar, I write about the ZAD at the end of the book, which is amazing place in France where an airport was going to be built, and a bunch of climate activists kind of went and occupied the site where it was going to be built, in solidarity with the farmers that had lived there for generations and generations and generations and didn't want to be kicked off their land. And they've been living there for like 15 years or something, and the airport has been cancelled now, which is so amazing. But really, like, this very sort of William Morris sense of, like, creativity isn't something that sits over there and you kind of go and watch a band playing and then you go about the rest of your life that isn't creative, but it's something that's like artistic expression woven into every aspect of the life of this place. And it's in the way the buildings are designed, it's in the like care that's taken over cooking, all those kind of things. Anyway, just to get back to your question, Henry, so what I'm doing now, really, since I wrote this book, I really came out of this being like, right, climate and art's at the heart of everything. And I've spent the last year, I was lucky to do a CLAW fellowship, which kind of allows you to take some time out and go and think and reflect and wander around a bit and talk to brilliant people like Rob Hopkins, who's here, who I'm a big fan of his work.
He said he'd only half read your book.
Well,
he
he's
did
a very
bit of
busy
this,
man. He's a very busy man, is Rob Hopkins. He's very busy changing the world. So, coming out of that to really focus my work now on climate and arts, and particularly in the theatre space, sort of doing a piece of strategic work across the theatre sector, which is about what kind of stories do we need right now in the context of the climate emergency, which, to be honest, is the context of the polycrisis of the everything. And it's a lot about thinking about how do we shift away from those kind of very individualistic hero's journey type stories to something more collective. How do we, again, something Rob's thinking about a lot, but these kind of, how do we start to help people imagine what the different world we're moving towards is going to look and feel like, and what the journey to get us there is going to be like, right? It's some people use this term through-topia, the idea that it's not about a perfect utopia where we're going to arrive and everything's just going to be fixed and sorted. It's actually about a kind of collective journey towards something different, strands of thinking around deep time and how do we shift our relationship with our role as ancestors, all these kind of questions. So that's the kind of landscape I'm getting into and thinking particularly what theatre can do in that context. So it's a new enterprise, but I've got a few things bubbling away which seem to be taking form.
Brilliant. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Was that enough time
to think of some questions? We've got a roaming mic.
Has anyone got a question?
Hello, I apologise, I've only just started listening, but I was wondering what you think about the tech industry's impact in all of this. As somebody who comes from a sort of tech-focused place myself, I get really frustrated by the waste and also the implicit role that tech has in sort of shaping culture and narratives. I was just wondering if you had any thoughts on that.
Oh my God, yes. I mean, in terms of tech, my sort of first, I have a 3-year-old, and so I spend a lot of time worrying about her relationship with tech and what it is doing to the kind of collective mind. Nothing good, I don't think. I do have, I think that I also have a note of caution for myself against my sort of inherent bias against tech, which probably comes from being a theatre producer and really believing in the power of people getting together in small groups, in small rooms, and not looking at their phones and like sort of engaging with an idea that's live. So I do challenge myself about that. I think that probably there's a huge amount of potential in tech, which I don't know a huge amount about. And I suppose it's, as with all of these things, it's about who owns it and what are the imperatives of the people that own it. And I think there's a huge amount of interesting stuff happening in a kind of alternative tech space, and, really interesting stuff happening with kind of AI and algorithms around. I was reading something the other day about someone who's trying to train algorithm on kind of Buddhist principles, which I'm all for.
Wow.
I know that, I know it's also being trained on my book, so hopefully it's got some good values out of that. But I think broadly I'm quite worried about it, but I don't know that I have any solutions.
That's what I can.
Fabulous. How do you make art accessible? So
Accessible, did you say?
so you said about the Barbican, and that's central London and expensive to get to. And how do you, because it's such an important message that you're trying to get across, but how do you get it to everyone here? If that...
Yeah, so that's a really big question. I suppose that's a big driver for so many in the arts community right now as well. And there isn't one simple answer, other than, I suppose, the way to make art accessible is to kind of give everyone the opportunity to learn about arts and creativity in their educational experience and their childhoods, and then hope that you seed something that's kind of present in all communities. I've also got a chapter in the book where I defend art for art's sake, and very kind of like formally experimental, like difficult, inaccessible art, because I think there's a sort of, which I think people are quite surprised about in a book with these themes, but there's a kind of like slight, a knee-jerk expectation that political art necessarily has to be very didactic, or it has to have a sort of declamatory approach. And I really think there is a space for kind of formal experimentalism, which, maybe takes a bit of work to get there in terms of understanding what it's trying to do, because actually sometimes the kind of most populist accessible forms can really be reinforcing stuff that, it's like the hero's journey. I'm not like totally anti the hero's journey. I think it has its place, but there's something really interesting, and I wrote about it in the book, the way the kind of hero's journey has, so prominent and prevalent in Hollywood, and like how that kind of totally sits alongside with the kind of the American dream and the sort of individualism of the last century. So I think, for me, it's really about the best sort of approach is kind of all different kinds of art made by all different kinds of people, coming at problems from all different perspectives. And I think that, sometimes people in our space can be a bit like, art has to be this and it has to do this one thing, and this is the way that it's going to go about making change. But actually it's like anyone who's like bringing a kind of like conscious engagement with the problems that we face and the kind of like beautiful future we want to move towards, and thinking about what can I do with my creativity to take us there, and like who is my community, who can I speak to, like that like very like localized thing again. I'm really like, I love theatre because it's just like, it isn't like easy like to like take to like millions of people all at once. Like it kind of has to be a bit difficult and like, hard to like stage it, and like for small crowds and all the rest of it. But like that kind of like really like, let's try and engage and celebrate a kind of local culture that speaks to our kind of towns and our communities. And that was a ramble, but
So as you were talking, I reflected on a couple of things. Hillary and Dan in Walthamstow, I follow them. And as I remember, they had a project, the bank job.
Yeah.
As I remember it, they bought £1 million of unpayable debt, put it in a van, blew it up, but with Canary Wharf behind.
Yeah.
A really clear, powerful message. Then I reflected on, as a Christian, Jesus and the Gospels, he told stories. Most of it was parables.
Yeah.
He changed the world. So my question is, how important, if you want to use art and creativity to make change, is the story and a clear message? Because I often worry that some stuff is just so abstract, people can't make a clear connection.
Well, I guess again, like it's not I guess people relate to different things, don't they? And that's why I try not to be too sort of like specific about what I think change-making art is, or limiting, because I know from like some of the things that have spoken to me and the artistic experiences that have spoken to me have like been so out there that I think loads of people would just be like, WTF, basically. So again, I think it's just that thing of like not one way, many ways, and people finding the way to speak to their communities, their audiences that resonates for them. And let's see artists kind of bringing what's distinct about what they do to the struggles. And, you know, like opera singers and like, you know, weird, far out experimental metal bands. Like, let's be on the same side. Let's be on the same team. That is fantastic. And I think, you know, also, you know, thinking about protest movements. I mean, so many of the really striking moments through kind of 20th and 21st century political history feel to me like moments of art, you know, like Gandhi going and sort of gathering the salt during the salt marshes, or Rosa Parks sitting down on that bus and refusing to move. These very, very simple moments that sort of seem to hold like so much kind of story and metaphorical potential for the kind of bigger struggle. Those moments really speak to me. So I think there's something as well about, you know, how can storytellers and creatives and artists bring their skills to the kind of big protest movements of our times and get a bit more integrated as well. And I think there's like, actually, you know, again, one of the heartening things of the last 2 years is that I feel like the kind of artistic communities that I'm a part of have come much, much closer to the kind of big political movements of our day. I think, you know, maybe kind of 5 years ago, there was a bit more space between the two. And I think that people are joining up around their kind of beliefs and their visions for the future in a way that I find very heartening.
Can I jump in on that about the arts sector? It is a public funded sector, and I think there's a lot of fear around speaking out too much and being categorised as a risk and therefore not getting funding. I just wondered if is that something you feel like that is a worry in the sector at the moment?
Oh my God, yeah. I mean, I suppose when I talk about that kind of coming together of movements, I'm thinking very much of a more kind of grassroots arts community and like makers and so on. I mean, I think there's a real crisis in kind of arts leadership and the big arts organisations that they're not equipped to deal with the sort of moral demands of our times, basically. I think there's been a real, you know, for years and years and years, the arts sector has kind of profited off the kind of like politics of the artists that it programs and it represents. And now when that sector is asked to kind of like put its money where its mouth is and stand up for that set of values, many are struggling, with notable exceptions. I think there's some brilliant leaders who are brave and doing brilliant things. I think that like I would say, you know, I'm certainly involved in quite a few conversations with people in leadership positions who are exploring what can be done about this and trying to kind of network and kind of collectivize, in a sense, to find solutions to some of these problems. But, you know, there's all this terrible stuff about UK Lawyers for Israel going after every single arts organisation that happens to stage a Palestinian poet and telling them that they're going to be reported to the Charity Commission. And, you know, what a terrible organisation, basically. You know, if you can do anything off the back of this talk, like go and sign the petitions against UK Lawyers for Israel, because they're doing the most kind of like bad faith attack on our cultural sector and on free expression, basically.
Clap. We might have time for one last burning question if anyone's really keen. There's one over on the far side. Over there. Okay. We'll try and bash through two. Yeah.
What place do you think political art and theatre has in a world where a lot of people would consider themselves apathetic to politics or have massive crisis of apathy towards politics and not caring about politics. What place and what threat do you think that then poses to artists trying to speak out when people a lot of the time don't care? And what place do you think art then has in changing that?
Oh, good question. You might answer this as well. You might have thoughts about this. I mean, I get, at a very, very simple level, the beauty of kind of arts and creativity is many people feel able to engage with an idea or a narrative that might not feel able to kind of attend a protest or get involved in direct action. So in that context, arts and creativity can feel much, much more accessible. And I guess for me, sometimes the kind of politics I think about within relation to arts is about a sort of... I think what I'm really interested in politically is the creation of culture shift. How do we, how do we really, at a sort of systemic level, start to change what we value in our lives and how we define our lives? I'm thinking particularly here about kind of Eurocentric cultures. I think probably a lot of Christians have got this quite sorted out, actually. So I'm talking about the kind of like drivers of kind of capitalist Eurocentric cultures. How do we really, at a deep level, shift towards a different set of values? Now, that feels very different to a politics which is about, I don't know what Keir Starmer said this week and how we should respond to that. So I suppose when I think about arts and politics, there's a sense of how can it work at that level of values that might not necessarily be very overt in its politics. A climate play, for example, might really be getting us to think about a collective journey towards a different way of being and existing without ever saying the words climate. It doesn't have to be about sad polar bears. And so, I guess that's for me the kind of level at which creativity can operate, which much more direct politics, can't, maybe.
I think we are, at our heart, storytelling apes. I think it's just in us to tell stories. And I just think about when people are drunk on a train, they sing. And I just think when you just...
That's the closest you get to being an ape.
When you break us down as a culture, we just want to share and be together. And that, like, the more they keep trying to dismantle that, and I think technology can be used to maybe put that as a barrier. But I think that is like a cultural shift of remembering that, like, let's just share a space and be joyous together.
Yeah.
Last question, and then we'll wrap up. We've got our mic? I'll come over.
No, it's go.
Oh, sorry, I didn't see it. Yeah, cool.
So, this is the question I've been trying to answer for about 3 years. So if you could...
Wait, we've got 3 minutes.
Okay, so more... In terms of sort of fine arts, in the context of the climate crisis, how can we excuse making more physical things? How can we excuse that?
Very interesting question. Yeah. Funnily enough, I've just written an article for The Stage about making theatre as well, which I guess has the same set of problems. Like, how can you justify building a set, creating all the costumes, flying people across Europe to present their work, whatever. Really, I suppose there's 2 elements. One is to really, really sink into the specifics of how you can do that in the most ethical and sustainable way possible. I think there's a real revolutionary potential in thinking about circular economy principles, for instance, which, have a very, very practical aspect to them. In the theatre sector, it's all about, well, how can we make sure our costumes come, we get our costumes secondhand and that they're used elsewhere. But then this, again, sort of has a value attached to it, which I think is really beautiful. So I think part one is kind of really thinking into that kind of practical aspect of things. And then really, for me, the second aspect, I've just really totally forgotten what my second aspect of this was going to be. Do you have a second aspect that you could add?
Was it relating to fine art? Going back to
yes.
fine art?
And can we justify? I mean, I think it's very, very difficult to answer that question in the abstract about what, and I think it is a much bigger question for society as a whole, is what materials and what resources can we justify consuming in order to kind of communicate our message. And I don't think that there's necessarily one answer to that question. I really think that the answer lies in, individually as an artist or as a community of artists, bringing a very, very conscious engagement to that question of what resources are you using and why. And what I find repeatedly is a kind of fear of even looking at the question. I work with a lot of theatre companies who want to do international touring, and it's so difficult to even bring them to a conversation about doing that, the ethics of that and the kind of environmental implications of that, because there's a sort of assumption that it just automatically means no way it can happen.
Or if I invite that question in, I have to question everything. Yeah. And if I question everything will fall apart. I think that's one of the main things that it's fear of going, please don't, life's quite hard already and I need to, pay a bill tomorrow, so can we just not?
Yeah, exactly. And that's exactly it. I think, it's really hard for anyone else to give you the answer to that question. You kind of have to find that answer for yourself through a kind of moral inquiry, really, about where you are and what's important and, where you're placing your energies and your attentions. And I think that, for me, is, rather than sort of a culture where people are just following, one way of doing things by rote, even if it is in the direction of sustainability, but a culture where people and artists are kind of bringing their whole selves to these questions and going through a deep inquiry about what they can and can't use and how they can and can't make art is the only way forward. So the fact you spent 3 years thinking about it probably means you're on the right path.
I just realised I was putting my hand up and I have the microphone. I will perhaps controversially add, or don't worry about it. And seriously, we were having this chat in the car on the way down. All the conversations we've had on the stage today have been about collectivizing. And that Henry was saying, as a poet, it's a very individual thing. And I imagine as a fine artist, it's perhaps an individual thing in that the weight of individual responsibility can weigh heavy on you, so much so that you worry about it for 3 years. So you're nodding, good, yeah. So forgive yourself. Give yourself a little bit of grace. Hey, Christians, I'm on brand. And think about, how do we collectivize it? So can I get a more interesting question might be, how do I take that individual thing about this is my resource and my artwork? How can I get a collection of people together and say, can we save, can we use less resource, or can we share and exchange in whatever materials you need? And then you're not only, there might be maybe you're using less canvas or whatever, but you're shifting the whole mindset and you're building communities, and then something far more exciting might come out of that. Gonna do it? Great, can't wait. Thanks.
Folks, thank you so much for joining us on the Rebel Rouser stage. Amber's book is available over at the bookshop. She'll be signing
really soon.
Yeah.
In half an hour.
Quarter to 4.
So dash over there, do pick up the book. It is incredible. It's a really good read and the perfect present for that person in your life that believes the world is falling apart. We have recorded this, so if you want to share it, we'll be on the Vandal Factory podcast. But can we have a huge round of applause, firstly, to all the staff of the Rebel Rouser stage?
Yay!
And secondly, of course, to Amber, Massie-Blomfield!
And to you.
We have been Vandal Factory. We've got our own show. We're speaking to some incredible Palestinian poets. We've got some music and some poetry and a bit of all sorts. And it'll be right here tomorrow.
At 2:15.
At 2:15. See you there, folks.
Bye.